Welcome back to the 1814 campaign, guys, and what an amazing or exciting turn 2 we've just had. We had 2 battles, quite a few casualties, and some interesting points that happened, so let's find out what happened. If you haven't already, do please like and subscribe. Also go and check us out on Facebook so you can always be kept updated on when new videos are coming out, and you can also share what you're working on. So for the campaign, we're using my own rule set. It's called Beggars and Scoundrels. You can go and purchase it on my Ko-fi channel. The link is in the description. So, for those of you that aren't aware where the 1814 campaign is set, it's set in France itself. So what happened this turn? In the north we saw the French with 2 corps pursuing the standalone Prussian corps. We saw down in the south the victorious Austrians and Russians from last turn pursuing the French, and in the centre we had coalition forces moving north and the French moving into more of a central position. So the first battle was the flight of the Prussian First Corps. As you can see here, they had 2 infantry regiments, 1 cavalry, 1 artillery and 1 light infantry, and coming against them were the 2 forces of the French, so they were heavily outnumbered. So for the table itself, we've got the main river running down the right hand side with a road running parallel. It is quite a forested map. We've got a few blocks. This was all created using the strategic map, but also within the rules for the specifics of battle. Got a small farmstead in the middle and a pond at the north with the town by the river crossing. You can see this sort of squared off area in the middle. That's where the Prussians will begin, and they need to get their forces off from the south. The French will have 1 group arriving from this corner on turn 1, and the second group will arrive anywhere from turn 1 to turn 3 from this corner. So turn 1 saw initiative go to the Prussians, who started making their withdrawal. However, due to the snow, it's very slow progress. The French second corps came on. They sent their cavalry out to the right slightly. There was an artillery exchange, both sides firing at each other's cavalry, and that was it for turn 1. Turn 3 saw the French attempting to speed march all of their troops, or force march their troops down the road and across the fields, whilst the Prussians again were trying to just force march their infantry back as fast as they could. The Lancers figured they needed to try and pull back. There's quite enough gap now between the infantry and the French, so hopefully their job is done. The artillery for the Prussians fired onto the infantry at the back there, whilst both of the French guns fired onto the Lancers. So the Lancers are getting pretty badly mauled, but overall they're still there. So turn 4 saw the French continuing their advance, whilst the Prussians were doing exactly the same in their running away. However, this turn the Prussian cavalry did get hit again by the artillery and did break, which actually worked out to be a benefit because they're moving towards their own board edge, so could save the unit, but time will tell. So jumping forwards to the end of turn 9, you can see there's a bit of movement. The Prussians were able to get the majority of their force off the table. They just left the gun there, and he was still firing at the end. The French were unable to catch them and actually destroy them. However, based off of the objective, the Prussians have taken a minor loss and the French a minor victory, in that the French were able to inflict enough casualties on the Prussians using their artillery fire. It was a pretty close one. Another 2 turns. If the forced marches hadn't gone off for the Prussians, the French cavalry would have got them, but it's kind of bittersweet for both sides. There was victory, but not a destruction, and there was an escape, but still a defeat. So, very interesting game. The Prussians live to fight another day. So yeah, that artillery piece from the Prussians really did inflict some bad casualties on the French. So not brilliant for the French. However, the Prussians did suffer worse. Even though they were able to escape, they did suffer even higher casualties. So our second battle is about, can the French escape across the river? So in this one we've got the Russians and an Austrian corps coming after the Old Guard and the Reserve Corps. It is pretty well an equal battle. The only downside is, again, we've got snow, so movement rates are pretty slow. So the battlefield is relatively flat this time. There's a preponderance of wood around the south and east. The mainstay is flat and open ground, just with a pond breaking it up. On this side we have the town of Troyes. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. The guard will be starting in this sort of vicinity. The Reserve Corps will be coming on from that road, and the French need to get their troops to the other side to get into good defensive positions. The Russians will be coming along this road, and the Austrians will be coming in somewhere within that half of the board edge. Their objective is to try and prevent the French from being able to cross the river and set up their defensive position. So it's definitely going to be a foot race between the Reserve Corps of the French and the Russians and the Austrians, with the guard holding firm in the village, waiting to try and prevent the Russians and Austrians from getting across. But overall, it's a very interesting scenario, or at least we thought, especially with the snow, because although the Russians and the Austrians might be a bit further away, if they can get some forced marches in, which go well for them, they'll be able to catch up and even overtake the French, and vice versa. So it's a very interesting situation. So at the end of turn 1, we saw a small movement by the cuirassiers in response to the Allied lancers and dragoons moving forwards. All of the Allied forces advanced down the road and across the field, and the French troops advanced down the road. It was a bit of a mixed bag. The officers all tried to get their men to double march, but yeah, not everyone followed the orders. In the shooting phase, French artillery fired onto the Allied lancers, inflicted a few casualties, and the Allies fired onto the grenadiers, again doing a couple of casualties. So turn 3 and turn 4 saw just a continuation of the moves. The infantry from both sides carried on plodding down the roads. Coalition cavalry are still making their advance towards the rear of the column. Cuirassiers are just moving out of the way, so hopefully they can protect that rear of the column. Other than that, a bit of artillery fire, but nothing too major at this stage. So at the end of turn 7, the French Reserve Corps has just made it to the outskirts of the village, and they're about to start crossing. The chasseurs of the guard, the grenadiers of the guard are leading the way across the bridge. The cuirassiers have ridden forth to try and see off the coalition light cav, and the remainder of the coalition forces are still advancing across the field towards them. Still very close, could go either way. So at the end of turn 8, we saw the French getting their troops to cross in the movement. The coalition infantry had advanced within musket range for the first time, and in the firefight between the Russian light infantry, the French light infantry, and the grenadiers, or chasseurs actually, in the town, the Russian light infantry were destroyed. On this side, in the melee, the cuirassiers and the lancers were destroyed, and the dragoons have broken and are withdrawing. So still pretty close. So turn 9 saw a complete reversal of fortunes. So the French started off with their troops moving in a nice calm manner across this side of the river, and they'd set up a nice defensive pocket to start repelling the enemy. During the firing, the Russians got a lucky shot which killed General Marmot. That in and of itself meant that all of the French units who weren't guard had to test for morale. The first passed, But then the second the Voltigeurs routed, they ran straight into the line infantry who were crossing the bridge, and they also routed, so half the French force is now in flight. So what went from a pretty good looking situation has now gone into a pretty bad looking situation. So turn 10 saw the French troops who had already routed continue their flight. The troops who had crossed in order started moving into position along the riverbank. The artillery has limbered and is starting to make its way towards the bridge, whilst the two remaining French regiments are trying to defend every step of the way. The coalition infantry are still closing in. Cool. So in turn 11 we had the Russians charge the French counter-charge, and in the ensuing melee the Russian unit was destroyed, but one of the French regiments has routed. The French are forming up to defend the town, whilst the coalition are hot on their heels. So what a battle that was. Not good for the French in regards to casualties, and they did lose Marshal Marmont, which some might say is a good thing, some might say is a bad thing. The coalition did suffer quite a lot higher casualties though, so that's good for the French, but the question is going to be how long can those casualty rates keep going before the French don't have any reinforcements or troops left to fight. So option 1 for the coalition sees the southern forces keep pushing hard against the French. Our two troops in the west withdraw to a more defensive position, and our central force head north east to try and engage the two corps up in the centre. Option 2 sees the southern forces again attacking the French. Our two western forces aim to surround the two French corps, so go on the aggressive offence again, and the central forces move north, but in an attempt to try and keep the French forces separate. Option number 4, similar to the previous one, however our southern troops, we leave two corps to defend the passes, whilst two corps march north so that we can try and build momentum facing off against the French in the centre. Then option 4 again sees a small number of the corps attacking in the south, more of a diversionary push. In the centre we have the majority of our forces push north, and then in the east the Prussians pull back to try and draw the French on a little bit more, whilst the Russians move north. For the French options, option 1 is a holding action in the south. Our western forces swing from the Prussians to go against the Russians, and we consolidate our two corps in the centre so they're ready to then move wherever we need them next turn. Option 2 is similar, but the western forces keep pursuing the Prussians, and our two central corps head towards the east to try and lend support for those operations, with a small movement in the south to try and prevent the Prussians from making a crossing. The third option sees the southern French forces actually withdrawing in a northeasterly direction. Again, our western forces go after the Russians, and our central forces head towards the west to give support again. So, similar to the previous option. And then the final option is for our French forces in the south to split, one to head straight back to try and get to the next river, and one to head in that sort of northeasterly direction again to try and get to another river crossing. Our central forces to move south, and our French over in the west to again go after the Russians. So, what do you think about those options, guys? Could you have come up with a better option yourself? Let me know down below. Also, at the time of this going live, the options will be open for voting, so head on over and give them a vote. But as I said last time, if you're enjoying the campaign, if you want to get your hands on it, head over to the coffee channel where you can pick up the rules which come with the campaign itself. Then you can fight it out either as we play along or just on yourself to see how you do separately. But anyway, till next time guys, I hope you take care.